The legendary 1996 NBA draft had number 1 pick Allen Iverson and the late great Kobe Bryant at the 13th pick. But with the 15th pick in the draft, the Phoenix Suns selected Canadian Steve Nash from the University of Santa Clara. And he's going to be our case study on how you don't need to have a lottery pick to find an MVP. This is episode 11 of the Royal City Hoops podcast, and this is part 2 of our NBA Drafting for Dummies. We're going to talk about how you can find an MVP without having a lottery pick in the first round. We're going to examine all the way back to 2000, go through how many players there were that really impacted their team, and how you can build your team without having a lottery pick. In some cases, it may not be the best thing for you. Now, I was watching the Knuckleheads podcast on YouTube, and they had Steve Nash on. He was a guest a while ago. And if you haven't watched it, you should, because Nash is, number one, a great interviewer, charismatic, interesting, intelligent, all of the things you think that he is. But he also digs into his own journey of being drafted by the Suns, playing behind Kevin Johnson and Jason Kidd, who was traded for mid-season, and explaining his need to mature and grow physically, skill-wise, as his own journey, and that things weren't given. And I think it's a great example of how there's a lot of players who aren't lottery picks who just need the right situation, which Jalen Rose has talked about, and time to grow in to who they're going to become. If you go through the list, now we're going to go back to all the way to 2000, and one of the things that struck me was that there were a high number of all-stars and really valuable picks made with the last pick in the draft or picks after number 25. If you go back to the previous episode where we talked about second-round picks, I mentioned that, to quote Woj, 90% of the NBA are role players. So if you go into the draft realizing I have a better chance of drafting a role player with this pick than drafting a superstar, you may be better off thinking that way. Look at how the New Jersey Nets built their team. Look at the LA Clippers, who also built their team with just talent and then attracted the All-Stars, right? The Clippers with Doc Rivers built a really good team, much like the Nets did, that didn't need a superstar to compete in the NBA, and they became attractive to superstars because players are looking at scenarios and environments as much as they are markets. So if you go back as far back as 2001, Tony Parker was the 29th pick in the draft. And he was an all-star, NBA champion multiple times. 2003, Josh Howard was drafted by Dallas. He was an all-star there. Now he flamed out a little bit. But again, 30th pick or 29th pick in the draft, you're getting a player who turned out to be an all-star who was really useful. And this is what you're trying to do with draft picks. You're trying to build your team, so it's important not to think of the flame out, but the impact they had. David Lee for the Knicks, 30th pick. He was an all-star. Jimmy Butler, Jimmy Buckets, was the 30th pick in the draft. All-star, MVP candidate, stud, top 15 player. 30th pick in the draft. Who else we have? We have Rudy Gobert, 27th pick in the draft, all-star. And then you can move down the line. Pascal Siakam, 27th pick in the draft, all-star. He's the one that comes to front of mind and totally biased because I'm a Raptors fan. But again, that just shows you what you can get later on. Good organizations, they mine talent. They grow it. They don't just simply hunt it and draft it. It's more to it than just that. Josh Hart's another player I really like as a role player, and man, could the Lakers use him this year, because what does he provide? Defense and shooting. He's doing that for the Pelicans on a cheap deal. He's the piece of that trade from the Lakers that I would have liked for them to keep. I'm not really high on Kyle Kuzma, but again, Kyle Kuzma was the 27th pick in the draft that same year. So I would have maybe thought, I want to keep Josh Hart, and if people wanted Kyle Kuzma, great, you can have him, because I don't know where they're going to play him. Are they going to play him at the 3 or the 4 with LeBron and AD? I don't know how that's going to work. It just seemed like it would have been a better move to keep Hart because he fits with your pieces. And again, we're looking for role players. 90% of the league are role players. Wing players are required. 3 and D guys, extremely valuable. I mean, if you go back to, who else was a late pick? Kevin Looney, 30th pick in the draft by the Warriors. Now, not a superstar, not even a star, but a solid role player who made a big impact on the Warriors team that allowed Steph and Clay and Draymond to be stars, and he supported them. You need those kind of players on winning teams. We talked about the Rockets, blowing up the Rockets, how they don't have any of those players. They can't spend any money to get good role players, and that's going to prevent them from being an elite team. This past year, 2019, Kevin Porter ended up in Cleveland. Nice little player. He could turn into something. The whole second part of the first round is littered with players like that. Steve Nash was the 15th pick. He's a 2-time MVP, multiple All-Star. You know who else was the 15th pick? Kawhi Leonard. You know who else was the 15th pick? Giannis and Kawhi. Those are 3 MVPs that we're looking at right now with the 15th pick in the draft. Again, let's go back to Steve Nash's story. He needed time to mature. He needed time to grow into the player he was going to be. He needed a good environment. We've just put out a bunch of names. Kawhi, Giannis, Pascal. I don't think anybody looked at those guys and said, man, we need those guys on our team. Otherwise, they would have been drafted higher. Who else is there? There's a ton of names. The same year Kawhi was drafted, Nick Vucevic was drafted. The next pick, the 16th pick, he's an all-star. Kevin Looney we talked about. Kelly Oubre. Karis LeVert was the 20th pick in the draft. And yeah, he had some injury history. But I have a really interesting take on what the Nets are going to do, is that they're going to move somebody in that organization. And Karis LeVert is probably the most attractive piece on the most attractive contract if they're going to build that roster, because they have Dinwiddie, they have Kyrie, they have KD. They're all kind of similar. They need somebody to do the dirty work on the perimeter, defend, etc. Karis LeVert is going to be that chip, I think, that they move to get another piece. Looking back, I mean, we don't have to think about all-stars and elite players. There's a lot of guys who made huge impacts on teams that were late picks. Serge Ibaka, 24th pick in the draft. George Hill, 26th pick in the same draft. You have Jarrett Jack, who is around forever. And maybe not somebody that's going to blow you away, but a solid pro who made an impact on teams. You need these guys to be on your squad. You need to fill out your NBA roster with good players. We talked about it in another episode, how to build your team. You need positional depth. You need length and shooting. You don't necessarily need to get that in the first round or in a lottery. You can find lots of useful players. I got a list here. Drew Holiday is another great one. He was a 17th pick. He was an all-star. We're looking at, who else do we have here? Clint Capella, OG Anunoby. We've got Roy Hibbert was an all-star. He was a late first-round pick. Nick Young, Marco Bellinelli, Kyle Lowry, and Rajon Rondo were in the same draft. Both all-stars. Kyle Lowry, very Steve Nash-like in that late pick, took a long time to develop. Now he's got a ring. What team at this point wouldn't want that guy to come to their team? Even though he's a little overpriced right now. But again, the math of the NBA, moving contracts, using that to work with your salary cap. Masai Ujiri doesn't make a lot of mistakes in that ballpark. I mean, you can get on him for drafting Bruno Caboclo, but he hasn't made a lot of mistakes out there. So it's important to understand when you're drafting your team. When you look at your team drafting. So I watch a lot of YouTube, and I'm still seeing all these guys analyzing drafts and the old grades and the redraft. The Ringer's doing this whole redraft thing, which is super cool. It's important when you look at your team drafting, wherever they are, to think in terms of they are drafting a role player. More than likely they are drafting a role player. The odds of you hitting a home run on that guy are very, very slim. I mean, we can look at all the 15 picks in the draft, and sure, we just need Steve Nash and Giannis and Kawhi and Kawhi Leonard, as 15th picks, but that doesn't mean all the 15th picks in the draft are going to be MVP All-Stars. You know, the Bucks drafted another guy in the mid-first round that I really like, that I think is, again, he's rounding into who he's going to be. Great floor game, really knows how to play, but he's maturing. He was drafted young. I'm talking about Dante DiVincenzo from Villanova, who's 6'5", can shoot it, can handle, can play. He's a well-rounded basketball player who really is going to come into his own because he's having a chance to grow. He's getting minutes. He's getting opportunity. When I think it was George Hill was injured, he stepped in this year and had a big couple of weeks. So, you know, if you're drafting your fantasy team next year, you might want to scoop him up in the late picks for some really good value on your team because he plays D, steals, assists, rebounds, threes, points, shoots well from the free throw line. He's a nice little pickup. Another guy recently drafted. The Pistons actually didn't screw up a draft. I think they got a really nice player in Sekou Doumbouya. Again, he was the 15th pick in the draft. So we'll see if he is another one at 15 that can really make an impact. But long, rangy. I really like his feel for the game. Reminds me, not in terms of the style of play, but just potential and motor. Reminds me of Pascal Siakam a few years ago when he was drafted. You could just see he knows how to play. He just needs time to figure it out. And you don't know whether that's going to come into play. Draft picks are guesses. There's no, other than LeBron James, you know, you can go through the list. In our next episode, on part 3 of the lottery picks, we're going to talk as much about the misses as the hits with draft picks, because the lottery is where people really get themselves into trouble. They judge the high picks way too harsh in terms of they should come in and have an impact. So that's what I've been talking about today. I want to thank my buddy Dave because he gave me a little compliment the other day, and I'm not sure it's a compliment. I think he told me that he fell asleep to my soothing voice. And at first I was like, hey, thanks, man. It means he's listening. But it also means I put him to sleep. Is that an indictment on my content? I don't know. It kind of hurt my feelings a little bit. But still, thanks for listening, Dave. So like if you like, comment if you have something to say, subscribe at your own risk. And thanks for tuning in.